Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, FPI, the Food Service Packaging Institute, for our research findings webinar. Today, we'll be talking about food service packaging recovery. My name is Ashley Elzinga, and I am going to be your host and moderator today. I am the Director of Sustainability and Outreach for FPI. Just a few quick housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. All attendees are on mute. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to submit those in the Q&A section. So a quick rundown of today's agenda. We will be going over a little bit of FPI, who we are, what we do. We will have a plastics recovery discussion. We'll be talking specifically about paper cup recovery, and then food residue and that impact on food service packaging, and then our question and answer section. So just really quick about FPI, we are a trade association with a North American focus, and we represent members who manufacture the single-use food service packaging products. So these are the converters and manufacturers of those products, the material suppliers such as paper mills or resin suppliers, and then the machinery manufacturers. We also work very closely with food service distributors and operators such as restaurants, cafeterias, and the like. So what is food service packaging? Food service packaging is anything that you would get, any sort of food item that is packaged and that is sent over the counter. So packaged in-house and then sent over the counter. Cups, containers, boxes, and paper bags are the main focus of our recovery efforts. We estimate this is about 80% of what is out there. Next slide. So we have several recovery groups under the FPI umbrella. We have the Paper Recovery Alliance and Plastics Recovery Group. These two focus on a broad range of paper and plastic food service products. We have the Specific Foam Recycling Coalition. This coalition specifically focuses on polystyrene foam recycling. And then the Paper Cup Alliance, which is laser focused on paper cup recycling. But all of those together are under the FPI umbrella. Our current Paper Recovery Alliance and Plastic Recovery Group members are listed here. As you can see, we have a very robust demographic from the supply chain and the value chain there. Just a quick high-level overview of the approach of what we're trying to do, which is really to increase the recovery of food service packaging, whether it's through recycling or composting. And to achieve that, we need greater access through partnerships. We need to track those. We need to track those access gains. We need to communicate that access and educate residents. We need to encourage spontaneous uptake of these programs. And as you can see, that is just a feedback loop that we have been really having some great growth there. And then underlying all of this is what we call our foundational work, where we answer questions through studies and research to resolve end market barriers, dispel these myths, and really lean on member support to help us with those. So we started our journey about a decade ago. You could see, next slide, please. Just really quickly, you can see this is what we call our foundational research. So, we started back in 2012. For over a decade now, we've been doing this, and we've been asking a lot of questions like, well, how much material is out there? Where does it go once it leaves the restaurant or the operator? Food residue was an early question that we asked. How does it flow through a MRF? What about composting? What's out there? And so really, all of these are very, important questions that we needed answers to so that we could be successful for the long term of these projects. And so all of this information of these studies is publicly available on our website, recyclefsp.org. Will also be linked, actually, that's already linked in the chat. So thank you. And with that, you can see the exponential growth that we've been having over the past few years with our community partnership program. You can see, this is just another quick infographic available on our website, but we've had a big we've had a big reach over the past few years. 6.9 million additional households that have been able to recycle food service packaging, focusing on end market development and really sharing those research, sharing the research, doing the research, and then also sharing those resources for the public to consume. So again, thank you all for joining us. Our first panelist today is Katie Rickey. She is an engineer with RES, a sustainability and recycling consulting firm. So Katie brings over 9 years of engineering experience, including plastic and steel manufacturing plants, material science, and biomedical engineering. Katie's recent work includes recycled plastic supply chain and reclamation landscape analysis, MRF flow studies, plastics policy, and demand trend research. So take it away, Katie.
All right, thank you very much, Ashley. So the first project I'm going to talk to you guys today about is the PET thermoform recycling cost and material flow analysis. This is a multi-phase project. So on the next page, we have that detailed out. So phase 1 was a foundational inquiry that was spearheaded by FPI and convened by RES and funded by 13 various associations and companies, where we tried to quantify the material volumes and flow of PET thermoforms as they currently stand and identify current potential recovery routes and pathways. Phase 2 is underway currently, but we are investigating various interventions to determine what possible route has the highest likelihood of recycling the most PET thermoforms available. And phase 3 is actually being housed under the Recycling Partnerships PET Recycling Coalition, where we're helping to fund various ventures in increasing PET thermoform recovery. And on the next slide, we can start talking about phase 1. So our first findings there were around the estimates of thermoform generation and recovery. So we estimated that about 1.5 to 1.6 billion pounds of thermoforms were generated in the US and Canada. This was in the year 2018, and only about 139 million pounds of that was recovered in that year. So while that is a relatively low recovery rate, there is significant volumes of generation, and also the PET thermoform generation makes up roughly about 20% of the total PET packaging market. So that's much higher than the estimates we were getting of about 5 to 10% thermoform presence in PET bottle bales. So now that we've determined that this is a viable option to pursue and there is material available, on the next page we have information about the options. Oh, next page. Yeah, thank you. About the options to recover this material now that we know that it is a concern. So option 1 is the status quo. So as it sits right now, MRFs sort a certain level of PET thermoforms into their bottle bales, usually up to 10% by weight, and that bale is sent to a reclaimer and processed into flake or pellet together. And then the following options are potentials for higher recovery. So option 2 is the MRF sorting those same mixed PET thermoform and bottle bales, sending them to the reclaimer to be sorted and separated as flake or pellet for thermoform to thermoform and bottle to bottle. This can get very costly in terms of CapEx material though. Option 3 was to send those same mixed PET bales onto the reclaimer and still separating them into thermoform and bottle streams, but having the thermoform rebaled and sent on to thermoform only markets. Additional options include MRFs sorting those PET bottle bales and thermoform bales separately and sending those thermoform only bales directly to recycling end markets for thermoforms. And option 5, slightly more theoretical, but having the thermoforms go along with the mixed plastic bale sent on to either PERFs or mixed plastic recyclers, since PERFs aren't really prevalent today, and having those bales sorted out, the thermoform only bales sorted out at the PERF or mixed plastic recycler. Now, on the next page, we'll talk a little bit about some of the barriers that each of those options present. So our top one being that there is a relatively low virgin resin price, which does make recycled plastics market a challenge to compete with. There's also barriers in the design and conversion around limited end markets for thermoform only as its own stream. And then the consumer and collection have very inconsistent education about the non-bottle PET and how and where it's supposed to be recovered, which creates confusion for our consumers. At the sortation level, there is limited sortation and storage at the various MRFs since they are so spread out, which can also create a problem for separating out PET thermoforms. And reclamation, they have a lot of technical and market constraints around those reclamation facilities, which can create challenges with those. So our overall phase one findings on the next slide kind of go into detail about that. So the MRF recovery channel, as stated, inconsistent acceptance by the PET reclaimer markets can limit MRF's willingness to put more of an effort in recycling higher levels of PET thermoforms at this time. And it can be really difficult for them to kind of custom make the materials because some PET reclaimers require 2% or less thermoform and some allow up to 20%. So it varied quite greatly depending on the process it was going into. The reclaimer recovery channel usually caps out at around 10% of bale weight on average, being PET thermoform, which really creates a barrier to MRFs wanting to unlock that stream and allow more education around those thermoforms going into their process. And the perf recovery channel, as mentioned, that's a plastic recovery facility. We don't really have those in the US today. So a lot of the value in the current mixed plastic bale is around polypropylene and high density polyethylene. So it could be difficult to get them to sort out PET thermoforms without proper market signals. So from those findings, we move on to phase two. And on the next slide, we can break down kind of our goals for the pilot project. So the main tasks we're going to look at today include the MRF sorting pilot and what issues arise there, the reclaimer trials to see if we can change how much PET thermoform they're taking on, as well as can the end markets handle those PET thermoforms in higher quantities. So the first task we're looking at on the next slide is for very specific to the California MRF market. We targeted this market for review because California is one of the only areas in the US that are currently sorting out PET thermoform only bales, but it was a little vague on what they were doing and why they were pursuing this method. But our interviews, it turned out that only about 15% of the California MRFs were reporting sorting and selling those PET thermoform only bales, with that number going down even further because offtake of the bales is waning, mostly due to limited reclamation processing capabilities and the end markets as well. So some recommendations around that to make sure we keep that a thriving market and make sure that expands more is looking around PET thermoform demand championship program to really drive rPET usage. Also legislation in California to incentivize the collection of PET thermoforms as their own stream. And as always with recovery, equipment grant funding can always help increase that amount. So on the next slide, we have our next task overview, which is the reclaimer research trial. So we went into a typical curbside PET bottle reclaimer. That means they are the ones that are really targeting that under 10% thermoform in their stream. And we wanted to see if no changes were made, are they capable of taking on more PET thermoform, thus incentivizing MRFs to increase the level of thermoform in order to get more material in there? And are there any areas of yield loss that are a larger concern there? So on the next slide, we detail how we went about that trial. We worked with a MRF in Monterey County, California, to secure various trial truckloads. So each trial consisted about 40 to 42,000 pounds of material. So it was a very significant run. The first one was low thermoform content in the bale. So about 2 to 5% was our estimate. The next trial was at 15% thermoform. then 25, and then finally 40% thermoform, which is what 40% is about the max thermoform we see coming out of the California market bales. So each truckload was run through the system. All outputs were measured to determine the yield loss. And on the next slide, we can go over where the yield loss happened. So each of the different areas of the reclaimer can be broken down into the mechanical sortation. So that's getting out all the contaminants through opticals, robotics, and human sorters, wash line loss, and then finally the flake sort loss. So they have sortation along every step there. And unfortunately, it was determined that as the thermoform percentage increases in each of those areas, there was higher yield loss. So their prime product was clean, clear flake. So keep that in mind as well. This does not include green or colored PET because they're just after clean, clear flake. And on the next page, so as I mentioned, the yield loss did increase as the amount of thermoform was there, suggesting that keeping the systems as they are today and just adding more thermoform, sending that on to the PET reclaimer is not going to work. There's going to be, there needs to be significant trialing and effort put through in order to either increase that thermoform or separate the thermoform from the bottles and send those on to separate markets. And as a note, the main area of yield loss was in when any type of sortation was happening. Also, they were also losing clear prime flakes. So when you have to sort out contaminants like aluminum, other polymers, or the colors, you're going to lose additional material. So the sortation steps do impact that as well. So that was the key findings from their reclaimer trial. And on the next slide, we did work with a lab tester called PFE in order to test all of the material that came through. So each one of our trial tests were sent on to PFE to estimate how they handled the current end markets today. We've just added we can add a report to their case study in the link as well. So on the next slide, it was all these tests were run. I won't go through in detail, but I just want to kind of illustrate how in-depth this testing was. It was very in-depth for all the different end market applications. These are per API guidelines, and this lab is very familiar with testing these products. And on the next slide, we show that even though the thermoform level was increasing with each test, it was not increasing proportionally to how much thermoform was in there. So the control test 1 is the one that we estimated 2 to 5% thermoform feeding into the reclaimer. Test 3 was the 40% thermoform, and it only measured 8.93% thermoform to bottle when it came out. So clearly we're losing a significant amount of thermoform as we go. That being said, on the next slide, we do have a statement that the production testing of the standard end markets for PET, so preform and bottle, sheet and thermoform, and fiber markets, had no concern regarding any of those test results. And on the next slide, we also just have a note from PFE that the flake and pellet data did not raise any major red flags. Even though it was only a 5% difference from control to test 3, it still didn't result in any correlation in worse testing for end markets. So that didn't really change any notes or recommendations from the reclaimer trial. Now, the final project, we also did another project around polypropylene cups as containers. So this is very different from the PET, but there was a question that was raised of are polypropylene cups being sorted with the containers? And a survey of the 4 largest national MRF operators, as well as a handful of local and regional MRF operators, the general consensus was no, they are treated just like any other polypropylene rigid. It's all the messaging is sent the same. And whether it's a mixed rigid bale or a polypropylene only bale, the cups are sorted and pushed with the same rigid polypropylene stream. Now, this is a relatively low number of respondents, but we estimate that this does represent about 45% of the total MRF throughput in the US. So it's relatively significant. All right, thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Katie, for all of that great information on PET and polypropylene. Up next, we have Bill Moore. He is the president of Moore and Associates, an international consulting firm that provides a range of strategic services and research to global recycling organizations. Bill has had over 40-year career experience as an environmental business professional, and he has held several positions in the chemical, solid waste, paper, and recycling industries. Bill's unique knowledge base includes all aspects of the global supply chain and demand of recovered paper, where he is currently considered a leading expert. Bill, take it away.
Okay, Ashley, thanks for that introduction, and thanks to the audience for being present. So my section is going to look at end markets for paper cups. So we've been looking at this for going on more than 4 years now. So to give you a little summary, in the residential world, paper cups are found in 2 grades: residential mixed paper, which is a subset of number 54 mixed paper, and sorted residential paper and news, number 56 SRPN. But paper cups can also be found in what we call a polycoated de-inking pack. That's where it's primarily polycoated papers and not other grades. And I'll talk a little bit later that paper cups can be found in some commercial grades too. So the good news is that global and US use of mixed paper and RMP are increasing, as it is really the only large source of under-recovered paper. But there are concerns about quality of RMP. Switching over to the news side, global and US use of old newspaper grades, which includes SRPM, is declining due to the worldwide decline in the use of newsprint and newspapers. The composition of RMP and SRPN are fairly similar. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the end. Domestic mill consumption of RMP exceeds exports, but RMP exports are still fairly large. The SRPN market is dominated by exports by a fair amount more than domestic. And a bottom line conclusion on some of our latest works is more and more mills are interested in using paper cups as part of their furnish. So just to give you some perspective on volume of some food packaging, food service packaging and food contact grades of paper products, I put 4 groups of materials on here to show what their volume is like. You can see paper cups up there and the box on the right-hand side at 628,000 tons in 2022. Actually had 3-year growth decline. The aseptic and gable top cartons, which we refer to as cartons, also had some decline over that time frame, but a similar volume, 608,000 tons per year. Molded fiber packaging, and you can think of the 3 types: gray, brown, and white. The white being mostly plates and some other food. Gray is big in egg cartons and carry-out drink containers, and the browns are mostly in protective packaging for electronics, etc. You can see their volume has been steadily growing at a fairly strong clip, 7.1% over the 3 years, and has now been the largest material in this category. SBS food packaging, solid bleached sulfate food packaging. Think of white packaging, frozen foods, dairy, bakery, meats, pharmaceuticals, and drugs have had some modest growth also in that time frame. Next slide. So to drill down a little bit deeper into the residential recovered paper grades, we talked about which grades where we find paper cups. And I mentioned that the composition of these grades don't vary significantly. The primary difference is that SRPN is supposed to contain more newsprint and less prohibitives. Prohibitives are really contaminants or non-paper contaminants. SRPN is supposed to have lower amounts of unbleachables, brown and gray paperboards, because some of it is still used in newsprint, and you want a gray color and not a brown color. And SRPN does command a higher market price than RMP because of its cleaner use. And some people still need newsprint in their furnishes, particularly in the paperboard grades like cereal boxes, pasta boxes, and the like. SRPN is much more likely to be produced by dual stream programs rather than single stream. And it's worthy to note that all RMP and SRPN and all MRFs producing residential materials is either going to make an RMP or SRPN. All of them have some level of cups in it, even if cups are not explicitly listed as an item in the program. Of course, if they're explicitly listed, which has been growing quite a bit in the last 5 years, the level of cup recovery goes up and the amount of cups in the bales gets higher. This bar chart shows U.S. mixed paper consumption categories by the different markets. The light green and yellow is the domestic mill demand, and the blue, purple is export demand. And if you go back to 2018 and you look at 18 through 21, you see some reasonable increase in domestic demand. We kind of flattened out a little bit in 22. But if you look at the blue bars in the first 3 years, you can see that the amount of export mixed paper went down quite a bit. That's when China backed out of the market for taking U.S. recyclables. And that popped back a little bit in 21 and 22 with Southeast Asia picking up some of that slack. But most importantly is the two bars on the right-hand side, which is our forecast for 25. You can see we're going to add almost 900,000 tons of new domestic capacity, a major increase. And we think exports are going to go down a bit because of the increase in export demand. Next slide. So in addition to finding cups in the residential recovered paper grades, we also find cups in number 37 sorted office paper. There's an allowance for them there. They're also occasionally found in the number 52 cartons bale. And I talked about mixed paper and sorted residential paper quite a bit. So on the right-hand two bullets, just to put this again in some perspective, you've got that 628,000 tons per year of cups in 22. The residential mixed paper grade is pushing 4.5 million tons, and even SOP is almost 3 million tons, and SRPN at just over 1.1 million tons. Next slide. So what are the technical considerations in cup recyclings that the mills look at? Solid bleach sulfate SBS fibers are really among the highest quality paper materials available for recycling. They're bright white and they have strength, which are two very desirable properties. And recovery rates for all paper grades continue to rise in the US, and the supply is declining, especially in the printing and writing papers, office papers, flyers, et cetera. And therefore, recovery of any sector is important to the paper mills. The majority of paper cups that are used are for hot beverages and have a poly coating on one side. And the poly coating allows the cup to withstand the high temperatures without breaking down. The cold cups have poly on two sides. And the real challenge for mills in using cups and other poly coated paperware packaging has been the time required in the hydropulper. That's a picture of the hydropulper on the right-hand side. Think of it as a blender with a high shear shaft, which breaks down the different packaging papers to remove the paper fiber from the poly layers and other breakdown packages. And they also need to have adequate cleaning and screening for removal of the poly-coated materials. Next slide. So here's a market as of the end of 2022, the 33 end markets for the paper cups in North America. They include tissue and towel producers, recycled paperboard, which is food and other packaging goods, containerboard, which is for brown corrugated boxes, and there's some recycled market pulp, 3 recycled market pulp facilities that accept them, and there are 2 building board products. And it's not lost upon us that most of this capacity is in the eastern U.S., and we'll talk about the West and export a little later in the presentation. Next slide. So we're going on 5 years of working with the mills that recycle paper about their acceptance and potential use of cups. And we're just finishing up surveying approximately 50 new mills that were not on the current FPI list that had a potential to consume paper cups. And the results of the survey to date, and it's almost done, are very encouraging. We think there's going to be as many as 15 new end-use paper mill markets for cups, some of which are in the Western US. And when we went into this research several months ago, I was concerned because recovered paper market pricing has been soft. And usually when supplies of recovered paper are abundant and prices are soft, the mills kind of don't want to hear you talking about new materials. But they were very much interested in looking at the new fibers. And that was a sign to me that last bullet, that all of the efforts, both on the collection side, the MRF side, and the end use research have really moved paper cup recycling forward quite well, and it will continue to grow. Next slide. So the export markets, as I mentioned, export markets have declined from their peak years in the US, and mixed paper exports have really declined at a faster year. However, export markets are still important, and almost 35% of recovered paper collected in the US was exported. And Mexico and Canada do count as exports, and those two countries, as well as Asia, make up the largest part of where our exports go. And it's down from 37% in 2019. Mixed paper in 2022, 42% was exported. The peak year was 2016, when China was still buying, and fully 57% of mixed paper went export. And as I mentioned earlier, SRPN is still a fairly high export market at 44%. So Mexico and Asia are the most important markets for the recovered paper grades, the polycoat grades containing mostly white fibers. But Korea, India, Vietnam, and Thailand are also large buyers. Korea mostly buys polycoat, but India, Vietnam, Thailand buy residential mixed paper with cup content. And the primary use of the polycoated grades in Asia and Mexico is for tissue and towel. The mixed paper use is for paperboard and containerboard. Export of recovered paper is a specialized part of the business, and a large percentage of it is handled by people who focus on export brokerage. There are a number of brokers that handle polycoated paperboards, and they've continually expressed an interest in handling recovered paper cup grades. Next slide. So specifics on the export markets for cups. The fiber quality on exports continues to be a high priority. Both customs clearing in the importing countries and receiving mills both assess their imports very carefully. U.S. suppliers consistently use the ISRI paper stocks grade standards for mixed and SRPN, and so do the importing countries. The ISRI's standards are used very much globally. Most of the Southeast Asia mills follow the PSI grade specification, and some mills might also allow slightly more lenient standards on prohibitives and moistures, but some countries also have stricter standards. None of the Southeast Asia paper mills, where a lot of the China material used to go, specifically identify post-consumer polycoated cups as allowable. However, small quantities of cups are being shipped and accepted in the two grades. And I think that wraps it up for me. Pass it back to Ashley.
All right, great. Thank you, Bill. And last but not least, we have Holly Hallowell. She is an engineer with RESIDUE, and she brings several years of experience in data analysis, organics repurposing, and MRF systems. While at RESIDUE, Holly has worked on packaging material flow studies, analyzed MRF data in operations to improve efficiency, and provided facility construction oversight. Take it away, Holly.
Thanks, Ashley, for that introduction. Next slide here. So today I will be providing an overview of a field study that I was a part of last fall. The main question we wanted to answer with this work was, how contaminated is food service packaging versus other types of commonly recycled contact packaging at MRFs? Answering this question is important because the commonly cited reason that food service packaging is not accepted for recycling is the concern about increased levels of food contamination. The most recent study was conducted in November of 2022, and it was meant to be a refresh of this work, as the previous audits were conducted in 2013 and 2014. The previous audits, they were done in Boston, Massachusetts, and at 2 locations within the state of Delaware. It's important to note that the previous studies and the most recent study were performed at facilities that do accept a wide range of food service packaging, such as paper and plastic clamshells, paper and plastic cups, and pizza boxes. Next slide. For this study, we had to explicitly define the differences between food contact and food service packaging. Food service packaging is anything that was used by restaurants, fast food chains, and similar establishments for takeout meals, typically holding food intended for immediate consumption. This includes pizza boxes from restaurants, hot and cold paper cups, paper and plastic clamshells, molded fiber bowls, and paper bowls for ice cream or frozen yogurt. Food contact packaging, on the other hand, is packaging that was used for pre-packaged foods sold at stores that came into direct contact with food, typically for longer-term containment of foods. Examples include bulk produce boxes, frozen pizza rounds, dry food boxes without a liner. So this wouldn't include cereal boxes, but it would include pasta boxes and pancake mix boxes that lack a liner. Also included were yogurt cups, plastic clamshells containing leafy greens, or bakery items, and aluminum trays and cat food cans. Steel cans were also included, even though there isn't a comparable food service packaging. Next slide. For the 2022 study, the fieldwork was conducted over 2 days at a MRF in Michigan. The MRF processes mainly residential material and accepts several types of food service packaging. A couple modifications made to the 2022 study from previous ones was distinguishing molded fiber packaging from paper and paperboard packaging, as well as re-identifying egg cartons as food contact instead of food service, as was done in previous studies. The MRF where the audit was performed uses the clean and empty language to guide users in recycling their material. Next slide. To make sure the sampling wasn't biased, we randomly selected trucks to sample residential loads, and no more than 1 sample was taken per truck. Material was sorted over 2 whole days, so multiple different routes worth of material were randomly targeted. In total, the sorting team went through 13 200-pound samples and sorted everything into main material categories with food service and food contact subcategories. For each sample, the total weight of food service packaging, food contact packaging, other recyclables, and residue were noted. Next slide. Typical characterizations involve collecting a lot of weights. However, in this study, after obtaining weights for large categories, food service and food contact items within a material category were organized based on the level of food residue remaining. A rating of 1 indicates a very clean package with no food residue, and on the far end, a rating of 5 indicates heavy food residue. During the study, ratings were assigned by 2 main people to ensure consistency. After assigning the appropriate rating for each package, packages within each material category and food service or food subcategory were counted. This way, the frequency of how many 2s or how many 5s within the subcategories for food service and food contact packaging could be compared. As you can see in the bottom, there is a photo of pizza boxes with a rating of 5 on the far left and a rating of 1 on the far right. Likewise, there's another photo for plastic containers. The bottom is a peanut butter jar, plastic peanut butter jar with lots of peanut butter, and at the top, there's a very clean berry container. Next slide. We found that both among food service and food contact packaging, most items were clean, rated either a 1 or a 2. Both paper and paperboard, as well as plastic containers, had low levels of significant residue, regardless of whether they were food service or food contact use. For example, paper and paperboard categories rated 4 and 5 totaled 0%, regardless of food service or food contact. And for plastic containers, both food service and food contact packaging rated a 4 or 5 totaled 2% of the total within their respective categories. The most contaminated materials included were corrugated food service packaging and molded fiber food service with 17 and 23% respectively rated either a 4 or a 5. Next slide. And although most packages were clean, the material category with the biggest difference between food service and food contact was the molded fiber packaging. And this is due to the main food contact packaging typically being exceptionally clean and the food service packaging being more prone to residue. The only type of molded fiber food contact packaging observed during the study was egg cartons, which you can see a photo of an exceptionally clean package at the top of the screen. And for molded fiber food service packaging, it ranged a lot more, but the types of items we saw paper plates, we saw bowls, drink carrying trays, and those all varied in the levels of residue that were observed. Next slide. In conclusion, the findings of the 2022 study were consistent with previous studies. The only exception was molded fiber packaging. And since this was a newly broken out material, we can't compare it directly to previous work. And it's also important to note that these results may not be representative of all communities since the study was only done at a single location. And lastly, many subcategories of materials found no packages rated a 4 or a 5. This included corrugated food contact packaging, paper and paperboard food contact and food service packaging, as well as molded fiber food contact packaging. Next slide. Okay, now I'll hand it back to Ashley for questions. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Holly. I invite all of the panelists, if you wouldn't mind coming back onto your video as we enter our Q&A portion. Quick reminder for all the attendees, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the Q&A section. We also have a new face with us, Risa Domino from RRS. She is a managing partner there. So Holly, I'm going to stick with you since you just presented. So quick question, how did you develop the 1 through 5 rating scale?
Yeah, so the scale was based on the previous studies that were conducted. We wanted to make sure that we could compare it over the years. And so since there were 2 previous studies that used that same rating, we wanted to stick with it. And although we only had 1 staff in common between the work done then and the work done last year, we had a lot of photos where we could make sure that the ones were really corresponding between studies.
Great, perfect. And then another question for you, Holly. Compared to those previous studies that you mentioned, why did the 2022 study break out molded fiber packaging?
We wanted to break it out because the use of molded fiber is different than other paper food service packages, right? It differs because it doesn't have a liner like cups would have, and it is growing in its use too. And so we wanted to be able to say, there is or there isn't more or less residue compared to comparable food contact packaging.
Understood. Great. Thank you. Next question I'm going to give to Katie. So are you seeing an increase in MRFs and reclaimers that sort and purchase PET thermoform only bales?
Unfortunately, we're not at this time. That's a little bit what the California piece was on. We haven't heard of any MRFs outside of California that were sorting the thermoform only bales. And the main reason it was happening in California is just with the California CRV, which is their bottle redemption, they have a higher level of thermoform proportion going to their MRFs already.
Got it. Great. Thank you. And then so to stay with you, Katie, on the polypropylene cups, why are polypropylene cups just treated differently than other polypropylene formats?
So what we found out was that they really aren't, but it has been a question in the past. I think the main things I've heard being a concern are the fact that cups have a high look-alike issue. So it's really difficult when you're looking at them physically to tell the difference between a polystyrene, a polypropylene, and a PET cup coming through a facility that has a lot of manual sorters. But I think the reason that it's not as big of a concern today is because the prevalence of optical sorters is just very high in these MRFs now. They're a lot more using optical sorters to sort the polypropylene line. So I don't think that's as big of a concern as it used to be.
All right, great. Thank you for that. And Bill, for you, do you think in the future that there's going to be more mills going to be accepting paper cups?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned in our work, we almost saw a step change from what we experienced over the previous 3 years. And as the paper industry continues to mine for high quality, available fiber, I see the demand going up for it.
Okay, great. There was a question, if you wouldn't mind, Bill, repeating the forecast for 2025 regarding new tons of capacity, or would you mind speaking to that really quickly?
So the question was, what is that 900,000 tons of new mixed paper capacity? So the short answer is that the domestic mills in the U.S. will add 900,000 tons of new capacity to process mixed paper through 2025. And to put some color to it, the paper industry is driven by the box business, corrugated boxes for e-commerce and paperboard boxes for food and other contact. And in the space of 2020 to 2025, we'll add more new paper making capacity than the US did in the last 25 years. And they're state-of-the-art mills, and they used to be only based on brown OCC, old corrugated containers. And now, because of concerns about the amount of fiber, they're putting in the equipment to be able to process mixed paper.
Right. Hopefully that means more paper cup access for us. So another question for you, Bill, for coatings, water-based barrier coatings on cups. How does that impact the recyclability of paper cups?
Well, I think we're still kind of early on that subject. I mean, paper mills do separate out all types of poly and plastic materials, but certainly aqueous coatings, if they have the right barrier properties and are compatible with paper machines, will probably find their way and their market share in the business.
Okay, great, thank you. Holly, this next question is for you. What is do you know the threshold for contamination for recovery? Is it 4 and above, 3 and above? Obviously, we don't want a bunch of peanut butter in a jar.
So this study that I worked on, it was really just to show what is out there and how much food residue there is comparing food service and food contact packaging. We would have to talk with paper mills and reclaimers to really know if there is a number corresponding to what they wouldn't accept to say. We didn't do any interviews to know.
Great. Well, sounds like a great research project that we might need to embark on in the future. So thank you, Holly. Katie, so for PET thermoforms, we had a question about clarification from the 40% down to 8%. Would you mind expanding on that?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't really have the proverbial smoking gun on why that was such a drastic decrease. We do have some theories that could lead to some of the decreases. For example, as I mentioned, 40% is about the maximum thermoform percentage we expect to see coming out of California with a really robust CRV bill. And that was about their maximum. So in order to get 40%, the QA/QC guy was not removing thermoforms from their PET stream, and it's likely that he might have missed a little bit more contaminants. So there's a chance that some of those had a little bit higher level of, food contaminants on them and things of that nature in that bale. Another reason could have just been sortation issues. Their entire process is really meant to target well bottles, because that's what they're made for. So there's a chance that their opticals or their robots just weren't firing or hitting properly on the thermoforms, because they're made to go for bottles. So that was kind of that note about not making any setting changes and why some trialing might need to be done to really understand that. Great,
thank you. Another question for you, Bill. The facilities shown on the end markets paper cup map, are they accepting paper cups as ordinary mixed paper bales or within a different classification?
So the majority of the mills on the list and on that map accept paper cups in ordinary mixed paper, residential mixed paper. But it's worthy to note that there are some recycled pulp mills in there that take poly-coated bales or entire bales of cups, and also some building product mills. And there are some tissue mills that are accepting bales of mixed paper for brown toweling with cups in them. And some of our new work, though, has shown some additional interest by traditional white bleached tissue mills that are based on recycled fiber who are interested in cups.
Great, thank you. And this is going to be for Katie and Bill. We got this question as a preliminary one. So how do adhesives and labels, do they cause any issues at the mills or at the reclaimers? If you guys could speak to that, maybe Bill and then Katie.
Sure. So a standard level of adhesives and labels that you would find in post-consumer packaging, it's kind of always been there, and the mills know how to deal with them. If they got full loads of labels, that would be a problem, but that's a standard thing. We say labels cause stickies, but so do many other things that go into the recovered paper stream. So the mills are used to managing those materials.
Yeah, and similar for plastics, they've been around for a while. Luckily, we do have some guidelines. APR provides recommended guidelines for the best labels and adhesives to use in conjunction with your plastic packaging to make it recycle the best. But as I mentioned at the reclaimer, we noticed any time that you had to remove unwanted materials from the stream, which did include labels, they were more likely to lose some lightweight PET with the labels. And in terms of the design of them, that played a very big impact too. For example, any bottles that had full shrink sleeve labels that were colored, that was seen as a colored bottle, even though the bottle itself was clear, and it caused it to be missorted. So it's all in the design of the labels that shows what impact it'll have on proper sortation and recovery.
Okay, great. Thank you both. Bill, so we have another question. It's what's the best type of mill to use paper cups as part of their fiber sources? Oh, Bill, you're on mute. Sorry.
The paperboard mills really consume the majority of the cups via mixed paper, but it does totally vary by grades. And some of the new mills are going to be coming on a list are roofing felt mills and some other paperboard mills, as well as tissue and additional recycled fiber pulp. So it's a wide range of mills. It just depends on the product, the machinery they have in place to clean up the paper and to get it in a form to make products.
Great. So another question we just got in the chat for you, Bill, if a mill accepts paper cups, will they generally also accept coated paper food service?
As I said, for the residential mixed paper and the SRPN, sort of residential paper and news, those materials are going to be in there. So they're used to dealing with them. And the functional characteristics of those other coated paper materials would be similar to cups.
Okay. Is there a threshold for the mills, or does it dependent?
I think it would vary from mill to mill, but given all of these materials are relatively small quantities in the total paper mix, so I'd be hard pressed to say that we would push the limits on any one material.
Great, thank you, Bill. So Bill, you said earlier the paper cup, the SBS fiber is really desirable for recyclability. What about Katie? What about PET thermoforms and polypropylene cups? How desirable are those in the material stream for reclaimers?
Polypropylene cups are desirable. Polypropylene is a little bit behind. We call it the big brothers of PET and HDPE in terms of maturity of their recycled markets, but polypropylene as a stream has been gaining in prevalence since 2018, and it's only increasing. So any material that can go in there, it all gets reclaimed the same as far as the answers we received. So I think that one is important. And PET thermoforms in the past, they haven't been as sought after, definitely not as much as PET bottles, but that's kind of part of the study and the drive that we're trying to push, is that they can be used and they should be used and recovered.
All right, great. Thank you. And then so we have one final question is, how do we increase food container recovery? Well, I will field that one, and I say, please engage with us, engage with your community, engage with your material recovery facility, your end markets. So, talk to your whole supply chain to help get these products recovered, not just the recovery, but also on the up end of the supply chain of the manufacturers, the material suppliers, all of that. Oh, we did get one more. What is the best step for a company to test lightweight food packaging? I believe I would give this to RRS because I know you guys do a lot of research in recovery, flow studies, things like that. So I don't know if Risa, you want to speak to that, but yes.
Sure. Yeah, there's a number of ways you can evaluate the flow. So you'd want to look at the key questions of will the package get through the sorting and recycling process, and then will it be acceptable by an end market if it does survive that process? So you'd want to look at the end market specifications to see whether the package or material fits into a bale or a spec. And then if it does, then you'd want to test it in a MRF to see if it flows to that bale or that material stream. We do offer services around RFID testing. I think there are other folks who probably do that sort of thing as well. But the key thing is, yeah, you want to understand how your material flows through the system and whether it gets to a market that can make something out of it.
All right, great. Thank you, Risa. So just a quick reminder for our attendees, we got a lot of questions about composting and a lot of questions about education when we were asking what would you like to hear on this webinar when you registered, but we will be having 2 additional webinars in this series, one focusing on compostable packaging, and then that will be in September of 2023. Haven't set a date yet, but that will be out soon. And then resident messaging as well as how do residents engage with packaging when they have to make a decision to recycle, compost, or landfill it. And that will be in November of 2023. So keep an eye out for both of those. I want to thank you all again for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.